Cleopatra, the last queen of Egypt, and one of history's most fascinating figures. Known for her beauty and intelligence, she is often portrayed as a femme fatale due to her romances with Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. But Cleopatra was much more than just a seductress. She was a shrewd and ruthless military and political leader who struck fear into the heart of Rome. Cleopatra chose her partners not just for love, but to boost her own power and authority. Her short yet dramatic life has inspired countless works of art, literature, and films. So, join us as we dive into the incredible story of one of the most powerful queens in history. Cleopatra was born in 69 BC in Alexandria, a city in the Nile Delta. She was revered as a goddess, specifically as the new goddess Isis, one of ancient Egypt's most important deities. Cleopatra was also associated with Aphrodite, the Greek goddess, whose attributes closely resemble those of Isis. Interestingly, Cleopatra did not have any Egyptian blood. She was born Cleopatra VII Philopator, a member of the Ptolemaic dynasty. It's important to note that this Cleopatra, the famous one, was the seventh in her family line. Her father, Ptolemy XII Orleans, was part of a line of Egyptian pharaohs who were actually of Greek origin. The Ptolemaic dynasty began after the death of Alexander the Great, the Macedonian king who conquered Egypt in 332 BC. When Alexander died in 323 BC, his empire was divided among his top generals, the Diadochi. Cleopatra's ancestor, Ptolemy I Soter, was one of these generals, and he declared himself pharaoh. The 300 years between Alexander the Great and Cleopatra's reign are known as the Hellenistic period. From a young age, Cleopatra showed a great interest in education. Her tutors were amazed by her intelligence as she delved into subjects like history, geometry, and mathematics. She didn't stop there, though. Cleopatra mastered 8 languages, including Egyptian, making her the first in her family to speak it fluently without interpreters. This linguistic skill later helped her form strategic alliances across the Mediterranean. Cleopatra's early education was deeply rooted in Greek philosophy. Under her tutor, Philostratus, she learned the Greek art of oration and philosophy, which enabled her to express herself with poise, elegance, and a soft voice. She loved visiting the great library of Alexandria, likely the most extensive library in the world at that time, which further enriched her education and culture. As queen, Cleopatra lived in a lavish palace in Alexandria, full of wealth and beautiful ornaments. The palace was enormous, with over 100 rooms and stunning external landscapes. It featured breathtaking gardens adorned with statues and fountains, making it the most luxurious palace in the entire Mediterranean. Cleopatra had 2 sisters, Berenice IV and Arsinoe IV, and 2 brothers, Ptolemy XIII and Ptolemy XIV. Times were tough for their father, Ptolemy XII. Egypt's economy was in a deep recession, and the Roman annexation of Cyprus made him appear weak, angering the Egyptian people. Eventually his wife, Cleopatra VI, and his eldest daughter, Berenice IV, expelled him and took control of Alexandria. Cleopatra VI soon died from a terrible disease, leaving Berenice as the new queen of Egypt. Ptolemy XII and his 11-year-old daughter, Cleopatra, sought refuge in Rome. They were hosted by Pompey the Great, a powerful Roman general who had conquered many nations in Africa, Asia, and Europe. Pompey was also part of the First Triumvirate, a secret alliance with Julius Caesar and Marcus Licinius Crassus. With the help of Pompey's ally, Aulus Gabinius, the Roman governor of Syria, Ptolemy XII regained his throne in 55 BC. Once back in power, he executed Berenice and her allies. As pharaoh, he also ordered the assassination of Egypt's wealthy families to repay his debt to Gabinius. Ptolemy XIII's health deteriorated, and he died at the age of 66. Cleopatra VII began to rule Egypt at the age of 17, following her father's death. She was supposed to co-rule with her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, and according to tradition, she married him when he was just 11 years old. While we don't know much about the nature of their marriage, there's no evidence it was consummated. However, we do know that a fierce rivalry between them eventually led to civil war. Shortly after they took the throne, Ptolemy XIII started to assert control and wanted to rule without Cleopatra. During one of Cleopatra's trips, Ptolemy declared her a traitor and expelled her from Egypt. Cleopatra escaped unharmed and sought asylum in Syria, which was her ally. In 48 BC, she returned to Egypt with an army, determined to reclaim her throne. Landing in Alexandria, Cleopatra's forces initially captured the city and drove out Ptolemy's troops. However, Ptolemy's forces regrouped and retook Alexandria. The war wasn't over yet. While the war raged on, a surprising message reached Ptolemy. It stated that Pompey, the Roman general and consul, was fleeing from Julius Caesar after a crushing defeat in Greece. Years earlier, Pompey and Julius Caesar were great friends. However, power struggles turned them into bitter rivals, leading to the Roman Civil War. After Pompey lost the Battle of Pharsalus, he fled to Egypt to save his life. Pompey had previously helped Ptolemy's father regain power in Egypt and felt the pharaoh owed him. He appealed to Ptolemy XIII for help against Julius Caesar. However, Ptolemy knew Pompey was a defeated man and, facing his own battle with Cleopatra, was in no position to assist. In fact, Ptolemy needed help himself. Knowing Caesar was pursuing Pompey and headed to Egypt, Ptolemy saw an opportunity. He thought winning Caesar's favor could help him crush Cleopatra's rebellion. As Pompey approached Alexandria, he expected a warm welcome. Instead, he walked into a trap. Upon his arrival, he was brutally murdered. A few days later, Julius Caesar arrived in Alexandria to find his adversary. Caesar was no ordinary man. He was an accomplished conqueror and a charismatic leader who had triumphed in numerous battles, amassing immense wealth and influence throughout the Roman Empire. He was received in Alexandria with great banquets and fanfare. During the reception, a royal advisor presented Caesar with a shining silver tray. When Caesar lifted the cover, he discovered the severed head of Pompey. To Ptolemy's surprise, Caesar was furious. Despite being adversaries, Pompey was still a Roman, and Egypt and Rome were at peace. Caesar saw the undignified killing of a respected Roman general as a grave insult. On Caesar's orders, Ptolemy's advisor was executed. Caesar then took his army to the royal palace, where he settled in to deal with the situation. Meanwhile, Cleopatra was contemplating her return to Alexandria when a brilliant idea struck her. Returning openly was too dangerous, as the guards had strict orders to keep her out, and she risked being killed. To carry out her stealthy plan, she enlisted the help of Apollodorus, her loyal friend and servant, and asked him to find the finest carpet available. Cleopatra and Apollodorus then sailed the Nile in a small boat for 8 days, heading towards Alexandria. When they arrived, Cleopatra lay down on the luxurious carpet, and Apollodorus carefully wrapped and tied it. They passed by the guards, claiming the carpet was a gift from a Roman ally, and made their way to the royal palace where Julius Caesar was staying. Once inside, Apollodorus insisted on opening the carpet immediately in front of Caesar. The Roman general watched as the carpet was unrolled, revealing the beautiful Cleopatra inside. Surprised, Caesar knew that she wasn't supposed to be able to enter Alexandria. Left alone, he offered his hand to help her up and said,
"It is a pleasure to meet the one they say is a goddess."
Cleopatra responded with poise.
"I am the daughter of Isis. I am a goddess and the queen of Egypt."
Despite his many conquests, Julius Caesar was utterly captivated by the young, enigmatic Cleopatra, powerless against her magnetic charm. Her sweet words and sensual gestures made Caesar fall at her feet. Cleopatra was exactly the kind of woman who appealed to a man like Caesar. They quickly began an affair, and Cleopatra, seeing Caesar's infatuation, seized the opportunity to ask for his help in regaining her throne. Using the murder of Pompey as an excuse to question Ptolemy's loyalty, Caesar announced his support for Cleopatra. Ptolemy was enraged and declared war on Caesar. Being on Egyptian soil, Caesar found himself at a numerical disadvantage and took a defensive position, leading to the siege of Alexandria. Caesar and his men fought hard to hold their ground, awaiting reinforcements. When his allies arrived, Caesar defeated Ptolemy's army at the Battle of the Nile. Reports say the young pharaoh drowned. Cleopatra regained her position as queen and began to rule Alexandria with Caesar as her ally. What started as a strategic affair became a powerful partnership, allowing Cleopatra to implement several reforms that revitalized Egypt. Cleopatra and Caesar enjoyed a passionate love affair, taking a trip down the Nile together. A few months later, Cleopatra gave birth to a son, Ptolemy Caesar, better known as Caesarion. Caesar eventually returned to Rome to address food riots and solidify his power, declaring himself dictator until stability was restored. Upon his arrival, he was celebrated with great fanfare, and a triumph was held in his honor. During this parade, Cleopatra's sister, Arsinoe IV, was displayed as a prisoner, symbolizing Rome's victory over Egypt. One day, Cleopatra traveled to Rome to introduce her son Caesarion as Caesar's successor. However, her arrival was met with mixed reactions, as Caesar was already married to a Roman woman. Despite the rumors and disapproval, Cleopatra settled in the royal house with her son and spent several months in Rome. Caesar's temporary position as dictator, initially approved by the Senate, became increasingly permanent even after the food crisis had passed. This, along with his relationship with the foreign Egyptian queen Cleopatra, did not sit well with powerful senators in the Roman Republic. Many were worried that Caesar was becoming too powerful and undermining the Senate's privileges. Consequently, Julius Caesar was assassinated by a group of senators on March 15, 44 BC. News of Caesar's assassination devastated Cleopatra, both personally and politically. Rome was crucial for Egypt's security and prosperity, and her relationship with Caesar had protected her kingdom from Roman invasion. After Caesar's death, Mark Antony became consul general. Later, power was divided between him, Octavius, and Lepidus, forming the Second Triumvirate. Caesarion, Cleopatra's son, was excluded from Caesar's will as he was considered illegitimate. Infuriated, Cleopatra returned to Alexandria and had her brother, Ptolemy XIV, killed to secure her position on the throne. By the summer of 41 BC, Mark Antony had established a base in Tarsus on the coast of what is now modern-day Turkey. Antony was planning a campaign against the Parthian Empire, but needed funds. Cleopatra, possibly the wealthiest woman in the world at the time, received a letter from Antony requesting her presence in Tarsus. Cleopatra saw this as an opportunity to secure protection and assert her son's rights. She sailed to Tarsus in grand style. The Greek historian Plutarch described her arrival.
She came sailing up the river Cydnus in a barge with a gilded stern and purple sails, while silver oars beat time to the music of flutes, fifes, and harps. Cleopatra herself lay under a canopy of cloth of gold, dressed as Venus, with beautiful young boys like painted cupids standing on each side to fan her. Perfumes wafted from the vessel to the shore, and word spread through the multitudes that Venus had come to feast with Bacchus for the common good of Asia.
The entire population abandoned their duties to witness Cleopatra's grand arrival. Mark Antony was mesmerized and fell in love with her immediately. They settled in the royal palace, holding significant meetings for the political benefit of their empires. However, Antony sought more than just political alliances. He wooed Cleopatra with sweet words and was delighted to find her equally enchanted by him. They spent several months together in Tarsus, and then in Alexandria, where their romance blossomed. Cleopatra seduced Antony, not just with her charms, but also with her immense wealth. She went to great lengths to prove just how wealthy she truly was. One legend tells of a party where Cleopatra claimed she could host the most expensive dinner in history. While the first course went fairly ordinary, the second course was quite extraordinary. Cleopatra presented a single vessel of vinegar. She then crushed one large pearl from a pair of earrings and dissolved it in the vinegar vessel before drinking it. Astonished, Antony declined his dinner, the matching pearl, and admitted she had won. The two pearls are estimated to be worth a staggering USD 28.5 million in today's currency. Though Antony was married in Rome, his deep love for Cleopatra continued unabated. Several months later, Cleopatra gave birth to twins. Antony named the children Helios, meaning sun, and Selene, meaning moon, and declared them his heirs. Antony had to return to Rome, where he resumed his relationship with his wife Fulvia, though he never forgot Cleopatra. Eventually, Fulvia fell ill and died, seemingly clearing the way for Antony to join Cleopatra. However, Octavian, Julius Caesar's nephew, opposed their relationship and suggested that his sister Octavia marry Antony. As consul of Rome, Antony had to maintain a respectable image and complied. Antony married Octavia, and within a couple of years, they had 3 children. The second triumvirate began to fracture, with Lepidus distancing himself from political life. Antony and Octavian ended up sharing power, with Antony taking the eastern provinces and Octavian the western ones. However, their rivalry resumed. Mark Antony and Cleopatra celebrated their second reunion in the city of Antioch, the capital of Syria. Despite being married and against Octavius's will, their romance was far from over. Antony began giving Cleopatra former Ptolemaic territories that had been taken by the Romans, including all of Phoenicia and various cities and regions around the Levant. Cleopatra and Antony had grand plans. After Cleopatra funded Antony's conquest of Armenia in 34 BC, they staged a grand victory parade in Alexandria. The parade, seen as a Roman tradition, wasn't well perceived in Rome. Soon after, Antony and Cleopatra gave a grand address to a huge crowd, with Cleopatra dressed as Isis and their children surrounding them. Cleopatra declared herself the Queen of Kings, and her son, Caesarion, the King of Kings. Her other children were made kings and queens of other regions, including Syria, Armenia, and Crete. This move did not sit well with Rome. Octavian began a propaganda campaign, portraying Cleopatra as a sorceress and brainwasher, manipulating Antony. These stories started to shift public opinion in Octavian's favor. To make matters worse, Antony married Cleopatra while still married to Octavian's sister, whom he finally divorced in 32 BC. This was the last straw, and the Roman Senate declared war on Cleopatra. The Battle of Actium, Greece, on September 2nd, 31st BC, was a disaster for the combined forces of Antony and Cleopatra. Defeated, they fled to Egypt. Cleopatra took refuge in her mausoleum, while Antony prepared for his final battle. Octavian, now on the brink of absolute power, invaded Egypt in August 30th BC. The last stand of Mark Antony and Cleopatra proved unsuccessful. By the end of July 30th BC, Octavian marched victoriously into Alexandria. Octavian sent a terrible message to Cleopatra, saying she would receive his pardon if she murdered her lover. Cleopatra did not respond to this macabre proposal and decided to flee with her army. She tried to rally allies and did everything she could to rise again with Mark Antony. However, after their defeat, Antony was no longer the same person. While Cleopatra was seeking a safe place to take refuge, false news reached Mark Antony, claiming that Cleopatra had been killed. Hearing this, Antony in despair shouted her name and, in tears, plunged his sword into his chest. Believing his beloved was dead, he felt he had nothing left to live for. Antony's self-inflicted wound did not kill him immediately, but left him gravely injured. When Cleopatra's messenger arrived to deny the news of her death, Antony was already very weak, but still conscious. His men carried him to Cleopatra, and in her arms, he took his last breath, urging her to yield to Octavian to spare her life. Cleopatra's despair was uncontrollable as she held her dying lover. Octavian cornered Cleopatra in Alexandria, marking the end of her reign. The pain and despair were too much for the Egyptian monarch, causing serious health problems. Cleopatra was reluctant to receive care, wishing instead to die. Octavian wanted nothing more than to bring her back to Rome and parade her in a humiliating march known as a triumph. To prevent her from taking her own life, he kept her under constant surveillance, for she had already attempted suicide several times. One of the only direct quotes attributed to Cleopatra, recorded by the Roman historian Livy, was,
"I will not be led in a triumph."
9 days after Mark Antony's death, they found Cleopatra lying dead on an elegant sofa with a serene expression. Dressed in a beautiful gown adorned with gold ornaments, it appeared she had prepared herself for death. It is said her death was caused by the bite of a poisonous snake, but this is controversial. Some sources suggest Cleopatra's personal physician, known for his knowledge of poisons, might have been involved. Regardless of the method, Cleopatra was gone. With her died the hope of a vast empire united through her children and her connections to Mark Antony and Julius Caesar. Shortly after her death, Octavian had Caesarion killed, deeming him a threat to his rule. The rest of Cleopatra's children were taken to Rome and paraded in the very triumph Cleopatra had refused to accept. Her funeral was solemn and elegant, fitting for an Egyptian queen. Her request to be buried next to Mark Antony was respected. After the death of the powerful monarch, Egypt became a Roman province, marking the end of the Ptolemaic dynasty's hegemony. Cleopatra passed away at the age of 39, after a reign of nearly 22 years. Throughout her life, she was known as a determined and cunning woman, always employing strategic intelligence to achieve her goals. Cleopatra's remarkable intellect and charisma enabled her to captivate two of history's most legendary figures, the powerful Julius Caesar and Mark Antony. The Greek philosopher Plutarch famously wrote about her.
Her presence, combined with the charm of her conversation, was irresistible to all who came into contact with her.
Cleopatra's ability to intrigue and enchant not only those in her time but also countless others throughout history speaks volumes about her enduring allure and significance.